I'm Amy Herring. I'm the Chief Deputy Prosecuting Attorney for the Hancock County Prosecutor's Office and the Chairperson of the Hancock County Sexual Assault Response Team.
I'm Abby Jessup. I'm a certified graduate legal intern with the Hancock County Prosecutor's Office, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Hancock County Sexual Assault Response Team.
We are joined today by a couple of brave local sexual assault survivors who are willing to share their stories with you. Please be advised that this content may be triggering to some individuals as we discuss the specific topic of sexual assault, and specifically these survivors share individual parts of their stories. It is certainly not our intention to trigger a trauma response, so we want to be sure to provide a warning that we will be discussing specific events of these particular individuals' survivor stories. But we will be focusing on creating a space and a community where survivors know that they are not alone, that an assault is not their fault, everyone's healing journey looks different, and there are lots of people and places to support you as a survivor right here in your local community.
It's an unfortunate truth that in the United States, 81% of women and 43% of men reported experiencing some form of sexual harassment or assault in their lifetime. That means 4 out of every 5 women and 2 out of every 5 men you meet have likely experienced some form of sexual harassment or assault in their lifetime. The Hancock County Sexual Assault Response Team is a group of law enforcement, victim advocates, healthcare and social service providers, as well as passionate civilian volunteers who collaborate to support survivors of sexual assault in our community. We do this by following uniform protocols, and when a report is being made, we seek to provide attention, putting the survivor at the center. We also work to educate our community on this issue to dispel many of the misconceptions surrounding it. Our team also wishes to magnify the voices of survivors in our community, to help others know that they are not alone. They have our support, and they can live full and happy lives despite what they've experienced. For privacy reasons, all participants will remain anonymous.
We are so grateful to our panel of survivors who have generously donated their time today to speak with us and share some very personal stories related to their abuse. Their willingness to speak up and share helps us create visibility in this community that we all live. Although every survivor is different and every journey to healing is different, there is unity amongst survivors and lots of dedicated, passionate people working to assist survivors at every stage of the healing process. There are many different healing tools and supports depending upon where you may be in your healing process. But healing takes an active and conscious decision to reflect with critical thinking and focus on processing trauma, dealing with feelings, emotions, and behavior changes, learning coping skills, self-care, and figuring out what you may need to regain happiness, pleasure, and trust in your life so that you can thrive in all aspects: social, emotional, physical, spiritual, and professional. While I am a huge proponent of victim advocacy services and therapy, that may not be the best course of action for every survivor. You will hear from a few survivors today about how they handled their individual assaults. Some reported to law enforcement, some never did. You will hear the outcome of each. There's no one-size-fits-all process, which is why it's important to research the support services in your area and create a plan that will work best for you for your individual healing. We are incredibly grateful for the support of the Henry County Sexual Assault Response Team and in cooperation with the Greenfield Central High School Broadcasting Department to bring you these survivor stories. First, I'd like to introduce to you Jessica. She's 28, she's a local nurse, and she'd like to share some of her story with you.
My story started when I was somewhere around 4 and continued until I was 12 years old. I spent 8 of the most critical years of my life being sexually assaulted by several male members of my family. It was something I became used to, it was normal to me, and it was expected. Truthfully, I don't remember many of the important details of my early childhood, but I will never forget the smell of the wood in my bedroom closet or the song that was playing on the radio during the time I realized that what was happening to me was not okay. I was 16 years old when anyone other than my best friend knew about what happened to me all of those years. On the day that I was baptized, I wrote a letter and read it out loud in front of the entire church and most of my family. I thought that maybe this was the cleansing that I needed to be able to wipe away the shame that I felt. But 12 years later, and I can still see the astounded look on my mother's face in the audience. 12 years later, and it was never discussed again in my family beyond that day. I was never offered counseling or given the tools that I needed to heal. Law enforcement was never involved. Nobody was ever called out or blamed. After that, I searched for healing in the comfort of men. I spent time being promiscuous and not protecting my body. I had no boundaries, and I never said no. When I was 22, God blessed me with a son, and in every sense of the meaning, that boy saved my life. I knew at that point that I could not continue the path of self-destruction that I was blazing down. Today, I can share my story because with the help of a therapist and a few very close friends, I have spent the last few years working to rebuild who I am as a person. I did a whole lot of self-reflection to resurface my foundation as a strong woman with a will and a desire for a way. I built walls that never existed, and I created boundaries from dust. Today, I am a great mother to a strong little boy. I am a compassionate, caring nurse, and I will be getting married in a year to a man whom I have a happy, healthy relationship with. I know my boundaries now, and I can say no. I can say no to anyone in any situation of which I am not comfortable. I have defined who I want to become, and I will not stop until I get there.
So, Jessica, you were 16 when you first told someone other than your best friend. What gave you the courage to finally come out and share your truth?
I think that as a teenager, I realized how much it was affecting me and my relationships with other people, friends, family, everybody. And so I felt like I needed to get it out so that I could start over and kind of not let it affect me as much as I knew it was or came to realize it was.
You mentioned that after that happened, you didn't exactly get the results that you expected when you came forward with your disclosure. Can you describe for us what you thought was going to happen and the discrepancy between that and what actually did happen in real life?
I think I thought that maybe my mom would try to help me, want to talk about it. My family members would want to talk about it, maybe ask questions about when, why, where, how, and none of that was, it was really almost never brought up. I think it got brought up that day when we got home, and that was it. One of the people who assaulted me was in a court case for assaulting someone else, a young child, and I thought that maybe then that might get brought up again because it was the same person, and it's still, my story never got brought up.
Do you feel like your family kind of swept it under the rug?
Yes, I do. I feel like it was better left untalked about or better left unsaid to them. I don't know why. I don't know if maybe my mom or parents felt ashamed for it happening for so long. But I guess those are the things I'll never know.
So how did that make you feel when you lacked the support of your family after your disclosure?
It made me feel like I had made a mistake by coming out, but I know ultimately now that that was not a mistake because it was what I needed in healing. It just didn't happen at the time that I needed it to happen.
You also mentioned sharing this disclosure with a friend prior to making a public disclosure. Did you feel like you were supported by your friend?
Absolutely. I shared it with her after us talking. It was my best friend for a long time, and she had a similar experience happen to her, so we found comfort in each other, being able to share our stories and how that was affecting us as young teenage girls as well.
You mentioned that there were several perpetrators of abuse in your life over the course of, I believe you said 8 years, is that accurate? Were these all family members?
All of them are family members or close friends of those family members.
Were they all males?
All males.
Do you still see any of those family members?
Yes, often, quite often.
And then when you were growing up, after you disclosed that, did you still see those family members at those family events or
yes,
throughout your life?
Yes, and that was another thing that I felt that I didn't receive the support from my family in enough way because although they all knew, we still were all forced to be around each other often. I think it was very shortly after that actually was Christmas, and we were all family Christmas together, and my mom never said, hey, do you want to skip this out or do you want to stay home or anything like that. I was forced to go, he'd be there.
Do you know if anyone in your family ever confronted the people that you accused of assaulting you?
I'm very assuming no. I think that, like I said, I think that it was just kind of swept under the rug, and I know that the main one, I know that he knows that other people know, and I think that it was just never talked about ever again.
So not only were you not given the choice of not attending family functions, you also don't think that the people that were perpetrating against you were told, hey, don't come to this because we don't feel safe.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Tell me how that felt then, trying to figure out when and where you could be safe with your family.
That was, I remember there were a couple of times when I was like 15 or 16, my best friend, I had asked her to come to some of these events with me. Like, will you please be there with me? I think it was like a Thanksgiving dinner or something like that. And my mom kept asking me, why do you want her to come so badly? And I never told her why, because it was before it happened. And she was my comfort, and still is my comfort, and my safe place to talk about those things, or even in interactions after that I had been forced to be around them, that I was able to find comfort in talking to her. Or constantly she would be like, you can call me if you need to, or we would just sit on the phone together or whatever, text the entire time, things like that.
So even though you didn't have the support of your family, you still felt like you could rely on your friend, and that was really comforting to you to get you through the healing process, at least to get started.
Yes, absolutely. She was like I said, my safe place and comfort. And the people in the church that I was at the time, they were also they were willing to talk. They were ready to talk to me and ready to be my support system. They just couldn't do any of the other things that my mother likely needed to do. Mm-hmm.
Have you ever confronted any of those who have assaulted you?
No.
Is that something that you would like to do in the future, or is this something that you've already dealt with in your own way and that's not healthy for you?
I think that that's something I've already kind of dealt with in my own way, and that would probably bring up dark, deep negative feelings that probably wouldn't help in my healing process.
And that brings up a point of everybody kind of healing a little bit differently. So how did you determine when you were ready to seek therapy and kind of look for help to start your healing journey? It sounds like it was a little bit later in your life.
Mm-hmm. It was when I had my son, and I realized that for me, becoming a mother and thinking about how someone was going to be looking and watching my every move when it came to everything from walking down the street, or the words that came out of my mouth, or how I handled relationships with men or with friends or with my family. It was kind of at that point I realized that I had some very unhealthy tendencies, and that I needed to fix those or try to heal myself so that my son didn't see those same things and think it was okay.
As a local nurse here in Hancock County, are you aware of survivor services and resources that are available for other victims of sexual assault?
Yes, we have great advocates and a great prosecution team that are also willing to lend an ear and have tons of resources out there. So yes, absolutely.
Is there anything that you would want to share with anyone who's either on the fence about coming forward or has come forward and doesn't feel like they're getting the support they need? What's something that you would share with somebody who was like you at 16 and didn't know what to do and didn't feel believed? What's something you would share with them now after having gone through this?
I would share to not hold it in, to find somebody, no matter who it is, if it's a friend, a parent, an aunt, and a church member, a teacher, or anybody who is willing to listen, to just get it out, because the longer it builds up inside of you, the harder it is to recover from that. And if you're able to fix those things earlier on and figure out how to heal that and not carry it through with you in life, it likely will come back up later on, so it's better to kind of handle it as you can.
You kind of already mentioned what your future looks like. You have some plans in the future to be married soon. You already have a son. You're working in the healthcare field. Future looks pretty bright to you. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
So you're looking forward to what's coming next for you, despite everything that's happened to you in the past?
Absolutely. I know that everything that has happened to me has just made me who I am today, and it's made me a better mother and a better nurse and a better person, because I've able to learn from the things that have happened to me instead of holding them in.
We really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much.
As you heard from Jessica, she never reported to law enforcement, but she still found ways to find support amongst her friends and this community. She took a different step towards healing in her process, yet she is still living a full life and is working here in the local community as a nurse. All survivors have the choice whether to report to law enforcement or not. Next, we have Victoria. She is 25 and a local attorney working here in our community. She will share some details of her story with you as well. Victoria did report to law enforcement, and we'll hear the outcome of her story next.
When I was 4 years old, I was victimized by my mother's husband. Although I was scared of what would happen, I knew that it wasn't right, and I told a member of my dad's side of the family. Once my family reported the assault, I assumed the man would cease to be a part of my life and go to jail. What ended up happening was entirely different. My mother didn't believe me and continued her relationship with this man, forcing me to have visitation with her only at my grandparents' house, not the house I had grown up in. My mother's husband was charged for his crimes, and what unfolded was a 2-year court process from about age 4 to age 6. All of those years culminated in a jury trial, which required me to testify at age 6 in front of the man who assaulted me, while half of the people I trusted sat behind him supporting him. The trial ended in a not guilty verdict, which is definitely not what I had anticipated or hoped for. I was really confused about the outcome, but thankfully I had the complete support of my dad's side of the family and was raised being told how strong and brave I was for speaking up and facing my accuser head-on, regardless of the outcome. I think often about how things might have turned out if I didn't have my family support to lean on during that time. I struggled for many years, feeling guilty for speaking up because the effect it had on my mother and her family. In addition to those feelings about the fallout, I was also dealing with the confusion and other emotions that result from being victimized by someone you thought you loved as a child at such a young age. It took me many years to work through those emotions and realize I had nothing to be ashamed of or sorry for. I saw many law enforcement officers, social workers, and mental health professionals in the wake of my reporting, and the thing that stuck with me about all of them was this sense that lawyers were the ones I felt really had the power to change my situation. I looked to them as the ones who could both keep me safe by getting me out of that home and by making people answer for their actions. Even though my trial outcome was not what I would have hoped for, the fact that attorneys who had never met me before believed me and fought for me when my own mother did not always stuck with me. So much so that I became an attorney myself and have been advocating for survivors of sexual assault in my professional and personal capacities. If I could share anything with a fellow survivor, whether you've shared your story or not, it's that you are brave, stronger than you realize, and have nothing to be ashamed of. I don't believe everything happens for a reason, but that everything is redeemable. It's the very things that try to break you that may just turn into what drives you to make your world a better place for the next person.
Do you recall at what age you realized that this inappropriate touching was, in fact, something that you needed to tell someone about?
I realized during the fact and shortly after that it was not appropriate and something I needed to tell someone about. I don't remember the exact amount of time between when it occurred and when I disclosed, but I know it wasn't very long, maybe a matter of months. I think I just had to have that internal struggle of who I was going to tell and how I was going to tell, because like I said, I was scared of what would happen with my mom and my mom's side of the family. So I did hesitate, but not for long.
And this was all while you were literally a child under the age of 5, that you were having to make these adult decisions about what to do with someone violating you and your trust.
Yes, I want to say 4 years old.
At the time that this occurred, how long had you known the perpetrator, the man that had violated you?
He and my mom had been married for maybe 2 or 3 years by the time that happened.
So he had been a part of your life for the majority of your life at that point in time.
Yes, and prior to that, to me disclosing what had happened, my mother was the primary guardian, and so I did spend most of my time at that house.
In that moment then, when these things are going on around you, how did you feel? You kind of mentioned that you were grateful for the support of your father's family to get you through all of this. Do you recall as a young child when this was going on, just what this felt like, telling the truth about what was happening and then changing the entire landscape of what your environment was? You were no longer staying at your mother's house primarily. You were no longer going to see this man that you thought you loved. You had told your sister things were going to change. Do you remember what that was like?
I was so scared and nervous, and I was embarrassed. I mean, and like I mentioned, it was much later in my life that I realized I had nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed or, scared. I had done nothing wrong, but at that age, you feel like you're doing something wrong by, sharing the truth. But in my head at that point, I was, potentially ruining my mother's life. And so I was very scared about what was going to happen. And I was very close to my mom. So the whole idea of it, actually disclosing what had happened, being around him, but also, what that could mean for my mom and I's relationship was very scary and very embarrassing to share something like that, super personal and private, with someone else who you're sharing after someone you love told you not to share with anyone. So it's just very conflicting and just scary is how I remember that whole experience. But I was very relieved after I did, just to know that someone was going to keep me safe, that I didn't have to go through that again.
Was your older sister the first person that you told?
Yes.
And how old was she when you disclosed this to her?
She would have been probably 12. And I think that's something that you don't hardly ever hear about. I mean, you hardly hear about survivor stories, let alone like the consequences to people around them. And I know it was really difficult for my older brother and sister to deal with kind of the falling out and just knowing what had happened to me. And so I would be interested to hear their perspective on it now, because I know it was very difficult for them and probably traumatizing to them as well.
You mentioned having to go to trial when this all occurred, so that means that the perpetrator did not admit to what he had done to you, did not accept responsibility or accountability, that after it was told to law enforcement, then this went forward and was prosecuted, but ultimately you did not get the result that you and your dad's family were hoping for as far as holding him accountable with a guilty verdict. Now, 20 years later, looking back on that, are you still glad that you and your family went through that entire experience to get you where you are today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it may not have resulted in a guilty verdict, but I know that I did everything in my power to hold him accountable and to look him in the face and look other people in the face and share my story and what happened to me. I think especially when the person is denying it, and in my case that there are people, that I love who are denying that it happened as well. I think that's very empowering to be able to look those people in the face and say, no, I know what happened to me, and I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm going to make sure the world knows about it. And whether or not these 12 people agree beyond a reasonable doubt that this happened, I'm going to make sure you all know it did. And I also don't think I would have taken this career path, gone into law as a field. It's hard to say, of course, because I was so young that it really, I've grown up with this aspiration, so it's hard to say, but I definitely think that it was worth it for those reasons, really, for being able to say what happened, and walk away knowing that I did what I could to keep him from doing that to anyone else ever again. And then for what, I've been able to redeem it in my own life to give me purpose, now.
As a prosecutor, I often hear from children, teenagers, adults, all across the board of all different ages, once they have disclosed something of this magnitude, that they don't realize that often that comes with depositions and testimony and trial and having to face their accuser, and how difficult that is, that we're asking them to do that. Did you find that to be an empowering experience for you, either in the moment or after the fact?
In the moment, being cross-examined at 6 years old by a defense attorney was just intimidating. I don't know that I found that empowering at that point. But, being able to walk away at 6 years old and say, I did that. I was put up there and I answered every question I was supposed to, and I told the truth. And that was empowering after the fact. And to have continued to do things like this or share my story with people who ask without being embarrassed or anything like that is empowering. And I hope that it's empowering to other people, because a survivor hasn't done anything wrong. There's nothing for them to be ashamed about in sharing what they've been through. I don't know about being empowering at the time of being cross-examined, but after the fact, yes, it's empowering to have said I did everything that I could have done.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with someone who is either unfamiliar with the process or is a survivor themselves and feels like they don't know what to do from here?
I guess I would say that you don't have to know to share your story. You don't have to know what the next piece is. There are so many people who are passionate about this type of work and who are here to empower you. All you have to do is speak up, and you'll be connected to the right people to help you figure out the next steps. And you are in control of the process. You are in control of how much you share and how much you're comfortable with. But at the end of the day, you speaking out is good for you, and it's good for those around you that hear your story. And it could be the reason that, someone is held accountable and unable to do something similar to anyone in the future. But it can also just be like something that gives you pride in sharing your story and knowing that, you have nothing to be ashamed about.
We really appreciate you sharing your story with us. Thank you for being with us today.
Of course.
Thank you, Victoria, for sharing your story with us. Here you got a glimpse of what it was like for her to report to law enforcement and go through the trial process. Although Victoria did not receive the outcome that she had hoped for by getting a not guilty verdict at trial, we still heard how she worked through her grief and her trauma and is now living the life that she always dreamed of. In fact, she is pursuing her passion to continue to work on behalf of survivors because of what happened to her. We thank her for sharing. Next up is Brittany. Brittany is 17 and is a local high school student. Brittany also reported to law enforcement and had a different outcome than Victoria. We will hear from Brittany next.
I want to start with thanking you, the judge, for giving me the opportunity to continue fighting for what I deserve. I'm thankful to have had the opportunity to share how the situation has affected myself and my family. I'm also thankful to be able to express the passion I have for doing everything I possibly can to not only ensure justice is served, but also fighting for anyone who may be put in the situation I was put in. As you have heard, December 7th, 2019 was the worst night of my life. The things I saw, felt, heard, and were exposed to are things no one should ever have to go through. I was a 14-year-old girl who only saw the good in people. As if figuring out the changes of becoming a teenager wasn't already hard enough, I also had mental health issues I was struggling with. However, the trauma from the night put me into a dark place that I will never be able to explain. The way he held me down that night is a visual and physical feeling I wish I could forget. He took my phone from me and put it away where I had no access to it. He made sure I had no way of reaching out to anyone so he could do what he wanted to me, and I couldn't do a thing about it. I had no power and no control of myself. I wasn't just a 14-year-old girl that was given alcohol. I was a 14-year-old girl who was 100% taken advantage of and assaulted. During the last year and a half, I've had more than enough time to think about what I wanted her husband to get as his punishment for doing what he did to me. I've had to come to the reality that no matter what punishment he is given, it will never come close to being enough. This is something I will always have to work on within therapy and myself. I found out that her husband and her recently had a baby. This means they brought a child into this world all knowing what charges they were facing. I 100% believe they did this on purpose to try to get out of prison or jail time. Another thing that has always been on my mind since this happened is that her husband's sweet, innocent little girl. She will grow up to be a teenager one day and will likely be how I was and see the good in people. That's what you do when you still have your innocence and believe that nothing could ever happen to you, especially by those who are supposed to be your family. She will likely have friends over to stay the night, and they too will think they are safe, just like I did. The most terrifying thing for me to think about is that if he doesn't get a punishment for the things he did to me sexually, I don't think he will learn that what he did is serious. If he sees he was able to get away with doing what he did to me at 14 years old, what will he do next, and how young will they be next? He is going to have more opportunities to be around young girls than others might because he is a parent. It makes me sick to think about how many other victims there could be or will be. As a result of his disgusting sexual behavior, I understand more than anything how long this case has taken to come to an end. I never wanted to see the outcome of him not receiving a sex offense conviction. If the court decides to accept this plea deal, I am pleading with everything in me that he received the maximum sentence for this offense, for this charge. I feel the maximum sentence is the least that owed me to considering he is escaping a sex offense conviction that he 100% deserves. As I mentioned in the last hearing, my aunt had a baby since this case has been ongoing. My aunt told me the day after the incident that if she ever got pregnant again, I would be the first to know. I truly believe she told me this, knowing what my weakness was. She thought if I knew there was even a possibility she was going to have a baby, that maybe I wouldn't come forward. That I would keep it a secret about what her and what he did to me. I wanted to make a separate statement for my aunt's case because the feelings that I have are far different from those I have about her husband. Unfortunately, I learned that being scared because you're being controlled by someone you don't know very well is completely different than the feeling of being scared because you found yourself being abused in a situation with someone you thought you could trust with everything. With her husband, I was so angry about what he did to me, and I always will be. But with my aunt, I'm completely heartbroken. What she did to me and allowed to be done to me has taken every bit of trust I had in me. I find myself in a consistent emotional roller coaster because how this has affected me emotionally. It's harder with my aunt because it's easier to be angry than it is to be sad and feel the worst type of heartbreak. And I wrote a little thing to my aunt, and I looked at her directly and I said, "Today I decided to forgive you, not because you apologized or because you acknowledged the pain that you caused me, but because my soul deserves peace."
So you read to us 2 different victim impact statements that you gave to the court in this particular instance. So is it fair to say then you were assaulted by 2 different people, both in your family?
Yes.
And gauging from what you have said, one of them was related to you as your aunt and the other one was her husband.
Yes.
Since you were reading these to the judge at a hearing, is it safe to assume then that you reported this to law enforcement at some point in time?
Yes.
How long after you were assaulted did you make a report?
A couple hours later.
So tell me how that came about.
I had the weirdest feeling And not only did I not know what was going on then, but I knew since I didn't know what was going on, there was something wrong. And I couldn't live with it anymore, just in that couple minutes. And so I had to reach out and tell somebody, because it wasn't right, and nobody should ever go through this.
Who was the first person that you told?
I told my boyfriend.
And once you told that person, how did you feel after having shared that?
I felt very scared, but I knew that he was the one that I can go to for anything, and that it would always be safe.
So you felt supported by your boyfriend once you disclosed what had happened to you?
Yes.
And you were 14 at the time that you were assaulted and disclosed?
Yes.
So what happened after you told your boyfriend?
After I told my boyfriend, we went to my house and told my family about it. Afterwards, we went right to the hospital.
So within a matter of a couple of hours, you went from being assaulted to an investigation starting.
Mm-hmm.
How were you processing all of that as a 14-year-old as it was happening? Did you really know what was going to take place when you spoke up?
I had no idea. The one thing that I was really scared to even tell my parents about was that I was drinking. It was definitely a hard topic to tell them. I was scared, nervous, but I knew I was in the right hands.
So you mentioned something that is actually a common theme with sexual assaults, and that's alcohol. There are a lot of alcohol and drug-facilitated sexual assaults that occur. And something that I've heard a lot over the years from young adults, whether they are teenagers or even legally able to drink, is that one of the reasons they don't report is because they voluntarily consumed alcohol or voluntarily consumed drugs. You had the courage, even though you said alcohol was involved and you were drinking, to come forward anyways, because what happened to you was not right. Do you still feel like that was the right decision for you?
I believe that was the right decision.
So you were afraid of telling your parents about that, and that turned out to not really be an issue at all?
Yes.
Okay. So once you went to the hospital, I assume that there was a sexual assault exam conducted?
Yes.
Did you meet with a police officer that night?
Well, that night, they could only take my blood, and they found all the alcohol. I had a lot of alcohol poisoning. And then they seen that I had the date rape drug, the roofie. And after that, just because it was late at night after I told my parents, I had to sleep on it. And then the next morning they took me and
Had your statement taken, did
Yes.
an interview. Did you receive victim advocacy services?
Yes.
Since then, you mentioned that it's been a long process. So from the time that you disclosed this sexual assault to the time that this case was concluded, it was approximately 2 years. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And so it probably felt like a really long time that this continued to drag out. And what was life like for you during that time?
It was exhausting. I thought that I was really never gonna get the end of this. I thought it's never gonna be over.
Were there times that you felt like you didn't want to go through with this anymore and it would be easier to just not cooperate any further with law enforcement and prosecution?
I thought this a lot.
And that's something I also hear pretty frequently when things take a while in the criminal justice system, is that survivors essentially just get exhausted with the process because it does take a long time to hold offenders accountable. What was it that helped you stick with it and speak your truth for the entire time and essentially just deliver these very passionate victim impact statements when you had the opportunity to do so?
I know what was wrong, and I know what I wanted to get from that. I wanted him to be put away, and so was her.
So you didn't mention it in those letters, and it's probably because through the court process, the judge was already aware of what had happened to you. Without getting into the specific details, was this something where your aunt was also involved in the assault of you, or was she present and observing?
She
Or
was
something else?
She was present and observing.
Okay. Did she ever touch you in an inappropriate manner during the assault?
I'm not 100% sure. Again, I was on those pills. I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember flashbacks of waking back up and
So even though you didn't have a completely crystal clear memory and things kind of came back in pieces to you, you still felt like this isn't quite right and I need to report what happened.
Yes.
At some point in time through your healing journey, did you learn that that was actually quite typical, given the neurobiology of trauma, that pieces of this story would come back over time, not in chronological order, and that's normal for an assault survivor? Did you learn that through your healing process?
Yes, I mean, still to this day, I wake up and I can see what happened in my head, and I'm like, that's another piece to add on to the story.
So what's next for you? You've made it through the criminal justice process and the litigation phase. So in some extent, you've gotten some closure on it, but as a survivor, it never really ends for you. That doesn't mean that the trauma is gone. And like you said, you still wake up and remember different things. So what are you doing now to take care of you?
I'm going to therapy, and I just talk to people that I love and get their opinions, and they help me.
Since you've been vocal about what has happened to you, have you found, frankly, quite a number of other people that can relate to your story or who have similar versions of an assault or that you didn't know about that have come up to you and said, you know what, me too. Something like that happened to me, or something like that happened to me when I was little. Have you found that there's actually quite a large number of people who have been assaulted that you just didn't know about that are already in your life?
Yes. In fact, knowing that other people has gone through the same thing that I have, it's definitely a reliever, and it just makes me feel so much better about not only myself, but my story.
So all of this happened starting when you were 14, and so this was going on while you were in high school, including the trial process and everything. You're still in high school now, is that correct?
Yes.
What do the next couple of years look like for you? If you were to pick your ideal plan for what's going to happen to you in the next 5 years, what does that look like?
I'm hoping to go to college and get my RN, possibly advance from that. And I want to do this just because I want to help people in the medical field, just like they did me. They comforted me, and they made me feel safe, and they did what they did to
help get you through?
Yes.
Is there anything that you would want people to know that have also been in a similar situation that either don't know what to do or are afraid to report or afraid to disclose to somebody? What's something that you've learned that you would like to share with those people?
Don't hold it back, because it definitely gets into your head and it hurts. You'll have so many emotions that go through your head, and none of them are good.
Thank you for sharing your story with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and attention today in listening to the stories of survivors of your community. We hope to remove the stigma from survivors sharing their stories, because we know there are so many among us. If you or someone you know is looking for support, wants to get involved, or is ready to share their story, please find Hancock County SART on Facebook for information on the team and how to make a report.